So after I log back in, notice I am getting an interesting message about the path and the default 𝐒𝐫𝐨𝐥𝐸 theme, so the change did take effect. Now this obviously has something to do with RVM, so if I try to see what version of Rails we have installed, yeah, we get an error. Like I said earlier, this caused me the biggest problems when I was starting out, and usually when installing a new system, I start by setting up the shell first, but let's see how we can fix this. Let's go into our files, and at the top, view, show hidden files. At the bottom, we have a //rc file for configuring our ZSH. Note the second entry here for themes. I will replace this with random just to see what we get. And if you want, you can either browse the website or go through the themes folder and check them out and see which one you like best. At the bottom, notice we have a path which is being exported, and it does reference our RVM installation. Okay, now what we need to do is go into our bash profile. Remember, we installed RVM while in bash, so the configuration was saved in this file, and more specifically, this line right here, which loads RVM into the shell session as a function. So let's copy this, and in the //rc file, I will just paste this at the bottom for now. You should know that the order in which you load functions is important. This will not work, but let's try it anyway. Clean this up a bit, save, exit. Back in the terminal, I will source the modified //rc file. Notice our random themes are now showing up. This one in particular is telling us the version of Node we have available, and note we get a command not found. Some themes are set up to look for specific programs, which we do not have in this case, so you can safely ignore this for now. I will exit the terminal, open it again. The error again shows up, but if I go back to the file and move this from the bottom to the top of the file, save and close this as well, source the new file, exit the terminal, and now we don't get the error anymore. Let me check the Rails version. Good. Ruby version and RVM. So we have everything. Now what about Node? This works. npm works as well. Okay. And if we try nvm, command not found. Well, again, open the home folder, show hidden. This time we will go into the bash rc file, and this is what we are looking for to load nvm. So let's copy this. Now in //rc, paste this. I will move the comment at the top, save and close, and hide the files, and close this. And now we get nvm. Okay, let's just make sure this is loaded. Good. Let's continue in the next video. In this video, let me show you an alternative to 𝐒𝐫𝐨𝐥𝐸, Presto, which is another ZSH framework. 𝐒𝐫𝐨𝐥𝐸 is very good, but at least in my system it can become slow over time, so I usually prefer to use Presto, which I think is a bit more lightweight. The first step is to uninstall 𝐒𝐫𝐨𝐥𝐸. There is a function available to us which will remove the framework, so let's run that. Clear the screen and exit. If we open the terminal again, this is the default prompt you get with ZSH. Let's go to the website for Presto, the configuration framework for ZSH, and let's see how we can install this. ZSH we have already. The first step is to launch the shell. We already did that. Let's clone the repository. Copy and paste the command. Okay. Now we need to copy the configuration files provided. We have a set of instructions which we need to input line by line, so let's do that. And notice we get two failures. The command we pasted earlier tried to create some links in our home folder to the Presto configuration files, but it had a conflict since these two already exist. But this is easy to fix. View, show hidden files. Notice this is a regular file, whereas the �presto.rc has the arrow which shows it is a link to another file. And if we open the two files, seems like they were created when we installed RVM. Okay, so I will create a new folder called .backup, and I will just move the files here in case we need them. Close this, and now we can just run the command again. So we get failures, but this is normal. These links were created the first time, so there is a conflict, but notice we do not have the two previous files in this message. I will exit out of this. Last step is to change the default shell to ZSH. We already have it. Note the command used, ch change shell. The S option is to save the change, to set it as the default shell, and bin ZSH the path of the shell. You can use bash instead of ZSH to change it back to bash if you want. Just remember to log out or restart. So opening the terminal, we get the default Presto theme. If we do our check for Rails, notice the text correction feature activated. I will type N for no, and command not found. NVM as well not available, so let's fix this. Again, files, show hidden, and the ZSHRC file. Notice we have a section for us to customize. In the bash rc file, let's get a command for NVM. Paste this, clean this up a bit, bash profile for RVM, copy and paste, move the comment, save and exit, hide the files, and close. So now if we check everything, it should be working. RVM, Ruby, Rails, good. NVM, Node, okay. If we want to use version 4, it still works, of course. NPM, okay. Going into code, test meet your project. Notice this theme does not show us the Git repository, so let me configure this. In the �presto.rc file, scroll down to the prompt section, and here we can configure the theme. We have a random option available again if you want to try it out, and the one I use is STEEEF. Save, close, hide, close, and this is what it looks like. Back in the folder, I am on the master branch, and I have some changes that were not committed. Like I said, you can use either Presto or 𝐒𝐫𝐸𝐴𝐶, it's really up to you. See which one works best for your particular approach. Check out the GitHub pages and just experiment and try things out. I will see you in the next video. One thing which I want to touch on is the subject of drivers for your hardware. If you go into the dash and search for drivers, you will get the additional drivers entry. And this will search for any available drivers and display a list that is specific to your computer. Now, because of the license that comes with the drivers, not all are activated by default. For example, I have an NVIDIA card. Notice I can use the NVIDIA binary driver, which is proprietary, or the Nouveau driver that is open source and the default. Below I have the Intel CPU driver, which is selected already. Most probably you will have something else, maybe a wireless entry, so again this list will be different for you. The subject of drivers is by its nature specific to your particular hardware setup. You can select to enable what you need, but in my case, let me show you something. You can see I have YouTube opened and I am on a video with a screen tearing test. If I run this, it looks okay. Now if I enable the NVIDIA driver, select the option and apply the changes, enter the password, and wait for the changes to be made. Okay, if I go back to that screen tearing test, you can notice the difference in quality. Now, sometimes after I restart, the quality improves. Maybe it's just my card, and like I said, your experience will most certainly be different from mine. It is generally recommended to enable the drivers for your setup, but since I will use this machine just for coding, I don't mind keeping the Nouveau driver enabled, so I will change this back. I would suggest you do your own tests and restart after you enable the drivers and just try things out and see how they work on your system. And that's about it for this video. In this video, I want to focus on the dock on the left side. It took me some time to get used to it, and there is no option to disable it that I am aware of. You can move this at the bottom of the screen in this version of Ubuntu, but what I usually do is, in the settings, appearance, behavior, I will set this to auto hide and set the reveal sensitivity to low, and notice I need to keep my mouse close to the edge for a few seconds to get it to show up. Good, but I usually set this all the way to low, so now it's not showing up. And if I need it, I just press the Windows key on the keyboard, this activates the dash, and with it the panel shows up so I can access whatever I need here. Short video, I know, but if you're not a fan of the dock and would like it to be hidden, you have this option available. If you get a system notification for software updates available in this part of the screen like we got in the Atom installation video, then just go to the Ubuntu software. We have a tab here for updates and it's showing us one notification. If you click on the entry, you will get a list with details about the update. So let's just install this. And the button has not updated to installed or something like that. But if I go to the refresh button in the left corner, the update was applied. A fix for this should come out soon as far as I know, but until then, that's how you can handle updates for your system. Thank you for choosing to take this course. I hope you found it useful. In case you have any feedback, comments, or questions, please feel free to send me a message. I would like to hear from you. And with that being said, thank you once again, and I will see you next time. Hello and welcome. In this short course, I want to show you how to set up a Ubuntu system for web development. To give you some background, I first started using Linux for Ruby on Rails learning and development. The system I was using at that time was not so easy to get going, and after reading a few articles, I decided to set up a Linux system to experiment with. I enjoyed the process. I liked how easy it is to set up and customize, and the fact that I can just focus on my work and not have to worry about anything else, so I just kept on using it. We will look into how to install the Ubuntu operating system using VirtualBox, then how to install Ruby, Rails, Node.js, and XAMPP for web development, and then how to install a couple of code editors. With that being said, I hope to see you in the next video. Hello and welcome to the first video. We will be setting up the Ubuntu operating system in a virtual machine. If you're watching this, I am assuming you do not have experience installing Linux, so following along with a virtual machine is easier to set up, and of course you don't risk breaking anything. If possible, I would suggest either dual booting or running this on a separate machine, since the performance is generally better. So that being said, the first step is to install VirtualBox. Download whatever installation kit is suitable for your system, either for Windows 64-bit or 32-bit or Mac, and install it. After that, the next step is to download the Ubuntu 16.04 installation image. This is the latest release when I am recording this. I am on the Ubuntu website, you can see the link above. And I will just click the download button and this will take me to the donation screen. I will just continue with the download and it should automatically select the correct version for your system. In my case, the AMD 64 ISO file for 64-bit architecture. Let me just speed this download along. And I already have VirtualBox installed. I will create a new machine and note that I am in the guided mode. Here below you can see a button that says expert mode. If you are seeing something different, you can click on it to change the mode you are in. Name will be Ubuntu, and it should automatically choose a Linux type of virtual machine and a version of 64-bit, which is more common and matches the installation kit I downloaded earlier. Next, we select the amount of RAM memory we will give to the machine. Generally, the more you can give, the better. Maybe 2 GB would be good. I will just set to 1 GB for now. And we need to create a hard drive. You can just click next to select the defaults. And the hard drive type, I would suggest you choose a fixed size, and what this will do is it will create the entire hard drive at once. The dynamically allocated option will just create this as the virtual operating system uses space, which can lead to a slower performance. For the size, I will select 16 GB, and let's create our new virtual disk. And our new virtual machine is ready. But before I start, I will go into the settings. In the display section, I will choose the 3D acceleration to be enabled, which can lead to a better performance since the virtual system will try to access your video card directly. And in the storage section, I want to select the Ubuntu image downloaded earlier. So below the IDE controller, click on the empty option and then click on the CD icon and choose virtual optical disk file, and I will open the file. Now, I would recommend you look over the options, maybe give some more video memory and just browse around, but for now it's fine, and I will click OK and start the machine. Let me maximize this, and VirtualBox is telling me that keyboard input is automatically captured when I am in the virtual machine, which is nice. There is a second message which says the same thing about the mouse pointer. And now we are in our virtual machine. The language is set automatically to English, so I will click on Install Ubuntu. I do want updates to be downloaded during the install process. Note the virtual machine detected unavailable internet connection, so it is using that. If you do not have a connection available, then this option will not be available. It will be grayed out. And you can check if you want the third-party software for graphics, wireless drivers, MP3 and so on. In case you need them, I will check them and click continue. And now we need to select where we want to install it. In our case, being a virtual machine, I will let it erase the entire disk and format it. If you want to set up a dual boot environment, you should see another option here, install alongside Windows or something similar. And confirm our selection. Note that by default, Linux uses a primary partition for storing data and a swap partition, which is used as a kind of extension in case your RAM memory is full, then data is stored on the swap, or if the system hibernates, whatever is in memory will be moved to the swap partition. Next, select your location, then your keyboard layout, and it should automatically select this based on your location, but I will just go with a standard English option. And finally, the user info, your name, the computer name, and in this case I would usually put Ubuntu, but the host operating system is already using that name, so I will choose VirtualBox. Then a username of your choice and a password. I want to be logged in automatically instead of entering the password every time, and the installation process will start. Now again, I will just fast forward through this since it's nothing special, you just wait for it to finish. And we need to restart the computer. Now, this usually fails whenever I install through VirtualBox. I guess maybe the system is trying to eject the installation CD and it cannot do this for some reason and it gets stuck or something similar. So up at the top where you have the menu, I will just click on Machine and Reset. And after it loads, we do get our new Ubuntu system. In case you have not used Linux up to now, this is the main desktop screen. You have a panel in the left which holds the icons to launch, and the first icon is the dash, which you can use for searching applications, files, and so on. This is the standard look of the Unity desktop environment, which Ubuntu uses by default. Now I will move to an actual system instead of a virtual machine in the next video, but if you want to follow along with a virtual machine, that's fine. There is something you should do, however. In the main VirtualBox menu, under Devices, you have the option to install guest additions. This is a set of drivers and applications which can improve the performance of your virtual machine, and it is recommended you install them. You might get this message that the ISO file needed is not available, and if you want to download it, I will choose Download and Download again. And Insert when it's finished. The auto run will start and I will run the software. Note the terminal has started, and this is something which happens in Ubuntu pretty often. You need to type in your password, the one you set up when installing the system, to authenticate. This is a security measure since the system does not grant you by default permissions to install programs. Now the guest additions are being installed and it should take a few minutes. Press enter to exit the terminal and I will right click and eject the guest additions. You should restart for the changes to take effect, and I will shut down and move to a live machine to continue working on our new system. And I will see you in the next video. The first thing I usually do on a new system is set up the fonts. I do not particularly like the standard Ubuntu fonts. If you want, you can keep them, of course, or you can install something else if you'd like. From the Google Fonts website, I will select Roboto and add it to a collection to download. Next, I will search for Roboto Mono and add this as well. And the Inconsolata font and add this. Now I will download our collection and click on the zip file and just open this directly. Now in order to install these, let's go to the files in our launcher, and this will open up the home directory where all of our files are stored. At the top we have the menus and I will select Show Hidden Files. A convention in Linux is that files and folders with a dot in front of the name are hidden. So I will create a new fonts folder, note the dot in front. This is a special folder which the system will check and load the fonts from so we can use them. And just move the font files into our new folder to copy them. Now I will uncheck this option to hide the files again. The next step is the system needs to scan and load the new fonts. So I will click on the dash and write terminal so we can access this. Actually, let me create a shortcut because we will be using it quite a bit. So the command we want to run is sudo, and this stands for super user do. Remember, Linux by default does not give you access to parts of the system. When you are invoking sudo, whatever command you are running receives elevated privileges, like the run as administrator option in Windows. And fc-cache is the command, and this is used to refresh the font cache. This will scan specific folders in the system and see if there are any changes and update the system accordingly. And I will pass two options here, F, which stands for force, to check all directories, and V to display the status information. And enter the password, and it's done. You will notice here the folder we have just created, and the fonts which were added. Okay, I will type exit to close the terminal. Now let's open the settings and appearance, and you will notice there is no option to configure the fonts. But no problem, we will add another program for that. While I'm here in the behavior tab, I will select to show the menus in the Windows title bar, as opposed to showing them in the menu bar at the very top of the screen. And the menu visibility to always show. The default is to show them when you hover your mouse over them. So with that done, let's open the Ubuntu Software Center and search for the Unity tweak tool. Remember, Unity is the desktop environment that comes by default in Ubuntu, and the tweak tool gives us some additional options to configure it. So let's install that, and of course enter our password. And you will notice a new icon was added just below our terminal icon, so let's open that. and you will find in the appearance group the font option we want. So for the default font of the system, I will select Roboto Regular, and you will notice the change in the window. The monospace font, this is the font which is being used in our terminal, will be Roboto Mono. The window title font again will be Roboto Regular, and the document font, in case you want to configure this, I will select again Roboto Regular just to have it. Now this section here is important. I encourage you to try out the various options, since it can improve the way fonts are displayed on your system. I will just leave the defaults as they are and close this. Now again, related to the fonts, I want to install Microsoft fonts like Arial and so on, since websites generally use these and they are nice to have. So back in the terminal, let's write sudo, again elevated privileges since we want to install something, apt-get, and this is the tool we can use to install software through the command line, and install, of course, since we want to install something, and then the package name. In this case, ttf-ms core fonts-installer, and this will download the installation kit for the Microsoft fonts. Enter the password, and it's telling us that 2 dependencies need to be installed, and then all the packages which will be installed, how big the download is, and how much disk space will be used. And then it's asking us for a confirmation, so I will enter Y and enter. Being a Microsoft product, the end user license agreement will show up, which you should read. You can use the down key to move down and the up key to go up, and the right key to select the OK if you want to accept it, and the left to deselect it. I will select OK and continue, and confirm again, and the installation will take place. So once it's done, let me exit out of this. One of the main differences I noticed when starting to use Linux is the way Firefox is displayed. There was just something I did not like, and I figured out finally it was the fonts. So I will go into the preferences, and under content, advanced, we can configure the fonts Firefox uses. So the serif font will be Times New Roman, the sans serif font will be Arial, and the monospace font will be Courier New, size 13. These should match the default settings you get on Windows, and it makes Firefox look a bit more familiar, at least to me. So let me minimize this, and that is it for the fonts. As a last step, I will remove these icons from the dock. You get the LibreOffice package installed by default if you want to look around, but I will just remove these to have some more space. And the Amazon link remove as well. By the way, in case you remove the link and you want to access the program again, you can use the dash and enter the name like LibreOffice, and it will display the results for you. Okay, I will see you in the next video. The next step which I usually do is install Git. In the terminal, let's run sudo add apt repository, and this command will add a software repository in our system. Now we have used the Software Center previously and apt-get, and these have as a basis software repositories which hold information about programs and what dependencies they require and the installation instructions and so on. And they centralize the data from there and make it available to us. So in this case, besides the standard repositories we have, I want to add another repository just for Git, and I am doing this because the version of Git in this repository is newer than the one in the official repositories. And this is called PPA, which stands for Personal Package Archive, git core/PPA, and enter the password. We get a description of the repository, a link to check it out if we want, and we can either continue or cancel. So I will continue, and the security key will be imported. Let me clear the screen. Now we have added the repository. The next step is to refresh the data in our system, to check this repository and add this new information to our already existing list. So we can do that by running sudo apt-get update. Let me clear the screen again. And now we can run sudo apt-get install git. And we get the same information, what additional packages are needed, some suggested packages to have, what packages will be installed, how much is the download, and how much disk space will be used. I will choose yes, continue to install it. Okay, so clear the screen again, and if I type git and check the version, we get 2.8.1, which is the latest when I'm recording this. I will exit out of this and I will see you in the next video. Next on our list is Ruby and Rails. I want to install 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸, a Ruby version manager, and what this will do is allow us to have multiple Ruby versions running on our system. So if you want to have the latest version 2.3.0 of Ruby, you can. If at some point you want to switch to Ruby 1.9 for whatever reason, you will be able to do so with a few commands. You can see the website above. And the first step, as you can see, is to input a GPG command. And this will save a security key on our system, which will be used for checking a bit later on. Just copy and paste it into a terminal. And let me clear this. And the next is a curl command. Curl is a utility to transfer data either to a server or from a server. A note it says below that we can append --rails or --ruby if we want to get everything in a single command. Remember, we are installing 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸, the program to manage Ruby installations, not Ruby or Rails. So this is just a helpful addition to get us started faster. I will paste the command in the terminal, and in case you are curious about the options here, the small s stands for silent to hide the progress bar and so on. The capital S is for show errors in case we receive any. The capital L handles location details like redirects, authentication, and so on. Next we have the site where we want to get the data from, and notice we have a pipe character. This will take the response from curl, the data it receives, and send it to bash, which is our shell. A shell is a program which receives our commands as we type them and then sends them to the operating system to be interpreted and executed. And the way we interact with the shell is through the terminal we have been using. So we are sending the data to bash with the S option to read the input, and stable refers to the stable version of 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸. If you would omit that, the development version would be used, which might have bugs or something else. I will also append --rails to bring in Ruby and Rails. Let me maximize this. And that's it. Notice it's downloading the archive from GitHub. It's comparing with the signature we imported previously, and it's installing 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸. Now the Ruby installation process has started and we need to input our password again. I will do that and hit enter. And that's it basically. Now we need to wait for it to finish. This process usually takes a couple of minutes, so I will speed this along. And it's finished. Note we get this message to start using 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸, source this file located in home, username, 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸 scripts. Source is a command which reads a file and executes the contents in the current shell session. In this case, it wants to add 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸 to our shell startup session. So let me copy this, paste it below, and hit enter. And if I check to see the version of Ruby we have, it is the current one. But let me show you something. If I exit the terminal, let me minimize this also, and open the terminal again. And if I do the same check, it's telling us that Ruby is not currently installed. Well, that is because of the way the shell is set up. We have files which are loaded when the shell is started, so when we open the terminal. And we have configuration files for after the shell is started. In this case, we are loading 𝐅𝐸𝐴𝐸 after the shell is started, so it's not working as expected. The way to fix this is in the terminal menu, go to Preferences, then Profiles, and edit your current profile. In the Command tab, check the Run command as a login shell and close. Now when we source the RVM script, it will be executed and added to our shell startup files. So let me paste the command again, hit enter and exit. Now if you'd reinstall the system, you should run the source command in a login shell directly. I just wanted to show you what happens. And now if we check, we do get our Ruby version. Let me check Rails as well. Okay. Now just to test this out, let me create a new Rails project. Let me type pwd, which stands for print working directory, and this will give me the location I am currently in. In this case, I am in my home folder. So I will make a directory called code with mkdir, make directory, then cd change directory into code. Clear the screen and you will note the prompt was modified, so it's now showing I am in the code folder to the left of the $sign. And here let's create a new Rails project, let's say test project. And done. Let me go into that directory and start a Rails server, and we get an error, which is telling us that Uglifier had a problem. Now Uglifier, as I'm sure you know, is a JavaScript minifier, and this needs Node.js to work, which we do not yet have. So we will come back to this and make sure it works after we install Node. Let me clear the screen. Before finishing, let me show you a few commands. RVM list known, which shows a list of Ruby environments you can install and test. It has Ruby versions from 1.8.6 to more recent versions, JRuby, and so on. If you want to test these out, you can just type rvm install 2.1 for example, and this will install Ruby version 2.1. If you want to use this Ruby version, just type rvm use 2.1 and this will load it into your terminal. And if you want to use 2.1 by default, whenever you start the session, remember we have 2.3 installed and that is the default, you can pass the -- default option, and this will set whichever Ruby version you specify to be the default. So yeah, that's about it. Ruby is now installed. Rails has given us an error, so let's work on that next. In order to install Node, I want to use a version manager, just like we did with Ruby. So I will use nvm node version manager. You can see the GitHub address above. And if we scroll down, we have the install command. You can install this either with curl or wget. Wget is another program you can use to download data. There are differences between curl and wget, but they are not important at this moment. Just know you can use either of these two commands, both will work to install nvm. I will copy the curl command, open a terminal and paste this. And notice we are using the pipe to send this to bash again to be interpreted. And it's downloading nvm, and that's it. It was added also to our shell, so if I close and open this again and type nvm version, we do get the version. So let's see how we can use this. Just type nvm install and a version. Okay. If I type nvm install 5, it should get the latest Node version when I am recording this at least. And it does, 5.11.0. And it's loaded Node version 5 and set it as the default, which is great. And let me double check. Node version, okay. And npm version, good. So we have these two available. Let's install version 4 of Node as well, just to see how we can use nvm. It's downloading 4.4.3, which is the LTS release recommended for most users. Note it's been loaded into the shell, but it was not set up to be the default since we already have a default. So if I exit out of this and run Node version again, version 5 is showing up as expected. But if I want to change this, nvm alias default 4, and this will set the default to version 4 of Node. And exit. Open again, and now version 4 is set as the default. So let me switch the default back to 5. Now you should know that I'm typing just 4 or 5 and it's matching what I have installed. If you would have version 4.1, 4.2 and so on, you should be explicit with your version numbers. Now let's go back in our real server and see what is going on. Clear the screen, run the server, and now it works. Great. So if I go in Firefox and check, we do get the standard Rails first page. Let me stop the server, and you can use Ctrl+C to stop it, and I will see you in the next video. In this video, let's work on getting XAMPP set up for PHP development. On the Apache Friends website, you can see the link above. I will click to download the Linux installation file. Again, this should automatically match your system settings and select the correct file. And save this, and let it finish downloading. Now let me minimize this, open the files application and go to our downloads directory, and you can see the file. Good. Let me close this and open a terminal. Change directories into the downloads folder, and we can use the ls command to list the contents of a folder. In this case, we only have the XAMPP file. Now we need to run this with sudo, and note the // in front since this file is in the same folder. This / is telling us to look into the current folder we are in and run the XAMPP installer file. I will input my password and command not found. And this is because of how files work in Linux. If you download something from the internet, it is not automatically executable. The system will not run the file unless you give it permission to run. And we can do that with chmod plus x. Chmod stands for change file mod, and you can set the attributes of a file with this, whether it's read-only or not, executable or not, and so on. Plus x in this case is adding, note the plus sign, the x option, x standing for execute, so we are in effect giving permissions to a file to be executed to run. And we need to select the file, so XAMPP. And you can press the tab key and it will automatically try to guess the file based on what you type. In this case, we only have one file in the folder, so it's easy to assume we want the XAMPP x64 installer. Press enter, the command was executed, and you can use the up key on your keyboard to see the previous executed commands. So up 2 times and we get the sudo command tried earlier. Press enter. Notice it did not ask for a password again since it stored a password for this terminal session, so we do not need to enter it again, and the installer is being executed. So just click next, next, and here we can see that the installation folder will be /opt/lamp. Click next. In case you are familiar with the Bitnami installers for Drupal, WordPress and so on, you can leave this checked. I will however uncheck it. Next, and next again. And done. I do not want XAMPP to run because we still have some work to do, so I will uncheck this and click finish. Now if we go into our files, by default we are in the home folder, but we want to go to the opt directory where XAMPP was installed. So we can go to our computer, and this is the root of our Linux system. Go to opt and lamp, and we have our files. You will notice the htdocs folder where maybe you are used to working in Windows, but if I right click, notice the new folder and new document options are not available. Because we are in the root file system, we do not have permissions to modify any of this. That's why we ran the installer with sudo, so it could have access to install in the opt directory. So what I want to do is set up another folder like htdocs to work in, so we do not have to mess around with permissions and so on. First, back in the terminal, I will run with sudo opt lamp, and what this means is that I am accessing the lamp executable file inside the opt lamp directory, and passing stop to stop the services entirely. So we get confirmation that Apache was stopped, MySQL and ProFTPD were not running. Okay. Clear the screen. Back in our home folder inside code, we have the Rails test project. So let's create a new folder called maybe PHP projects. And we will make this accessible by Apache so we can have our PHP code here. In order to set this up, back in the terminal, again with sudo, open 𝐠edit, and 𝐠edit is the default text editor we have in Ubuntu, and pass in the file we want to open, in this case the etc hosts file. In the first line next to localhost, I will press tab once and add php.dev. The hosts file maps IP addresses, in this case 127.0.0.1 being our local IP address, to host names, meaning devices connected to a network. So here php.dev and localhost both map to 127.0.0.1, and I'm doing this just to have a nicer looking address in our browser. Save and close this. Clear screen, and we want to edit the Apache configuration file next. So sudo 𝐠edit opt lamp etc httpd.conf. So we are editing the httpd.conf file in the opt lamp etc directory. As you can see, this is the main Apache HTTP server configuration file. Press Ctrl F to activate the find functionality, or scroll down to where you see virtual hosts. When using virtual hosts, you are basically referring to running more than one website on a single computer. So you would have website 1 and website 2 both running on server 1, for example, and you would have two virtual hosts. Notice by default it does point to a file for configuring virtual hosts, but it is commented out. The file is not being included, so let's just remove the number sign and save and exit. So let's open now the virtual hosts file, press up for the previous command, and the file is in etc extra httpd vhosts.conf. We have some comments first, and down you can see a couple of examples on how to set this up. I will remove the first example, and for the second example, let's see. The virtual host will be php.dev, the one we set in our hosts file earlier. The server admin, I'll just leave this default. The document root, this needs to be the folder we created earlier. So back in the terminal, I will right click and open a new terminal. Notice we are in the downloads folder, so cd into the tilde, and the tilde character is the home directory, so we are starting from the home directory into our code folder, PHP projects. And we can use the print working directory command to get the location we are in. So copy this, exit out of here, and replace in our document root. Server name will be php.dev again, and the errors and custom log I will just leave as is. One last thing we need to do is give Apache access to this folder, so open a directory directive and specify our projects folder, note the quotation marks, and close the directive. Inside we have require all granted so it can access the files. Save and exit. Clear the terminal. Now let's start the server. Sudo opt lamp and pass the start option. Okay. Back in the folder, I will create a new empty document, index.php, and just write some basic PHP code here. And if we check php.dev, it works. Just to double check, I will create a new folder, test, copy and paste the file inside, and modify the contents to make sure we are getting it. And if we go to php.dev/test, we are getting the file. Nice. If you are familiar with XAMPP, probably you are used to working with phpMyAdmin, which you can access from localhost/phpMyAdmin. And that's it basically. I will see you in the next video. One more thing which I want to install is the Meteor.js framework. This is a full stack JavaScript framework for developing applications, and it is very nice and fun to use. I will click on install, and notice we only have one command to run, a curl command, and we are sending this to sh, which is a shell utility. Copy and paste this in our terminal. Now, in case you are wondering, sh is a shell command language. It is a programming language, and bash, what we are using as the shell, can be considered an implementation of SH. Piping to SH, on Ubuntu at least, will output the commands to dash, and this is not the dash we discussed earlier, the one in the upper left corner for finding applications and so on. This dash is another shell like bash and is simpler and faster, and in this case it will be used for the purpose of interpreting the Meteor installer file and getting Meteor set up on our system. So let me speed this up, and it has been installed, and it's setting up a launcher script in our user local bin folder, so we can access Meteor directly, and we need to input our password. And done, it's ready. Let me go into the code folder and run Meteor create test Meteor project to see that it is working. Now go into the directory and run the Meteor server. And if we go in Firefox and check, we are getting the usual Meteor start page. Okay, let's move on in the next video. Next on our list is the Atom code editor. This is what I usually use. So open a terminal and we will add a new apt repository, ppa web update team /atom. Now remember, we need to add a new repository, update our software list, and actually run the installation command. You can chain commands together using the double AND operator, and this will run the commands one after the other. So sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get install atom. Enter our password, confirm adding our new repository, and the lists are being refreshed. And now Atom is being installed. Let me speed this up. Notice we get a notification for software updates available, but I will touch on this in another video. And installation is done. I will just clear the screen. If we go to the dash and search for Atom, we do find it. I should mention that sometimes I need to log out and log back in for the applications to show up. It does happen from time to time. Let me drag this into the dock, and we have Atom installed. Now obviously the code editor is a personal choice. I am sure you have a preferred one already, but this is how I usually set up my editor. The first thing I usually do, go to Edit, Preferences, and scroll down. The font I use is called Inconsolata. I use 25 as the font size. Scroll past end should be enabled, so you can scroll past the end of the document. Indent guide and invisibles, I sometimes turn them on, but I will just skip them for now. Soft wrap, yes. And a soft tab type. This will use spaces instead of tabs if you are not familiar with the setting. In the packages section, I will disable spell check. The wrap guide as well, and this controls the line you see at the 80 character limit. By default it's at 80, you can of course change it. So disable that. And autocomplete snippets, disable as well. Now let's install some packages. Highlight selected is nice to have. When you select a word, it will highlight all the occurrences of that word in a document. File icons. Let me add a folder to see this, and I will open the Meteor project. Notice we get some nice icons in our view here. Now sometimes I disable the color of the icons. For that we can go into the package and deselect colored and also force show. But I will leave them like this for now. Back to install, let's add Babel, and this gives an alternative JavaScript syntax highlighting, better than the default one in my opinion. In case you work with NPM, another good package is autocomplete modules, and this will autocomplete the path of the modules when you are importing or requiring them in your projects, so it's just nice to have. Emmet, of course, is very helpful. In case you are not familiar with it, this package is for speeding up HTML and CSS workflow. Let me open up an HTML file. you can just write .container and press tab, and this will expand to a div with the class of container, and it assumes you want a div element since it's so common. You can do a number sign and some text, and this will expand to a div with the ID you specified. You can nest elements by using the greater than sign, like so. You can create multiple elements by specifying the element you want, using the times operator and how many elements you want. You can do a lot of things. It's very helpful. Another nice package is called 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐥𝐿, and what this does is color the curly braces based on the level of indentation. So, going into the package.json file, notice if I click, the 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐿 package is in effect, and the first pair of curly braces is purple. The second level is a light blue. If I add a third level here, notice they are green. Fourth level is yellow, and so on. Close this and don't save. And if you want something interesting to use, you can try the power mode package. And if I open a file, notice it adds some nice effects when I type. By the way, in case you want to disable this, you can of course access the packages menu, and you can toggle it on or off in this way. Now if you go to the themes, what I usually use is called an Old Hope. This one. Another one which is very nice is called Robin Hood. Let's install this as well. Let's apply the first one, and I will keep the default one dark UI theme. And this is what the theme looks like for HTML syntax and JavaScript syntax. If we try Robin Hood, this is the JavaScript syntax and the HTML syntax. And that's about it for Atom. I will see you in the next video. Let's continue by adding brackets. I will open a terminal and sudo add apt repository ppa web update team brackets and sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get install brackets. Enter the password, confirm adding the PPA, the software lists are refreshed, and brackets is being installed. Let me speed this up, clear the screen, and minimize this. And if we search for it, you should get the new application. Let me add a shortcut for it here, and we do get our new editor. Let me close out of this. Now again, you probably have some settings you prefer, but what I would usually change is the font size, let's say 18 pixels, and the font family, of course. Now if you try to launch the live preview, let me click OK here, and we will get an error, an unknown error. If I remember correctly, brackets opens up live preview in Chrome, not Firefox, what we have by default. So we will come back to this after we install Chrome. In the extensions, let's see. Emmet is nice to have, so let's install that. Okay. And in the themes, Delcos Dark theme is a nice one to try out. Let me go to View, Themes to select this. So as you can see, it is a nice dark theme, and it has these interesting effects when you select a new line, which I always liked. Let me open up a CSS file as well. So that's about it. We have installed brackets, and we will return to that error after setting up Chrome. Let's continue in the next video. I want to add Visual Studio Code next. This is a very nice editor which you should try out if you haven't already. And we will use a different installation method. This time we will use Ubuntu Make. This is a command line utility that is for developers, and its aim is to make it very easy to install developer tools such as Visual Studio Code, Eclipse, WebStorm if you are using that, Android Studio, and a few others. So the first step is to install Ubuntu Make. Sudo add apt repository, ppa, Ubuntu Desktop, Ubuntu Make, and sudo apt-get update, sudo apt-get install Ubuntu Make. Press enter. Note it's asking for a confirmation to download the dependencies and continue installing, so I will choose yes. And speed the installation process. Done. Clear screen. So to use this we have the command 𝐒𝐚𝐥, short for Ubuntu Make obviously. Then the category of the software we want to install, in this case IDE. We have also some alternatives like Go for the Go programming language, or Web for the development edition of Firefox, for example. And Visual Studio Code. It will ask us to confirm the installation path, so enter here, and the software license appears. I will accept this by typing A and pressing enter, and the download and installation begins. Clear the terminal. Now if we search the dash, code does show up, and a link was already added because we used Ubuntu Make, so it's not needed to actually create a shortcut. I just wanted to show you this. Let me open up the editor, and after installing, the Visual Studio Code web page is opened. Let me close and then minimize this. So we have our new editor. Let me add a folder to work with so I can show you a bit. And go to File, Preferences, User Settings. Notice we get a dual pane layout. The default settings on the left with all the options available to us, and our user settings on the right. The first thing I want to change is the editor font family. Notice I can select this and it will autocomplete. And the editor font size 25 pixels. And I do not actually need to specify PX. Notice it is in red. Visual Studio Code comes with a linter by default, and it's telling me that I have an error here. A very nice feature to have. Let me remove this. So this is the default theme, which is okay. Emmet is available by default as well. So that's about it. We have this editor set up as well. Let's move on in the next video. The last item on our list of code editors is Sublime Text, and we will use another installation method this time. So let's go to the website, download, and download the 64-bit installation kit for Ubuntu. Notice we have a black dot to the left because it detected our system. And save the .deb installation file. Now the reason I want to go through this process is, if I remember correctly, if you have a Sublime Text license, you can use the newer versions, the development builds, which are not publicly available. I am assuming these can be downloaded as a deb file, like we are doing now, so I want to show you how this can be done. There is a PPA we can set up like we did for Atom and Brackets, but I wanted to show you this option also. So if we go to our downloads folder, we do have our deb file. And now deb is a type of archive specific to Ubuntu, and more precisely specific to Debian, which is another Linux distribution like Ubuntu, and actually Ubuntu is built on top of Debian. There is another type of archive called RPM, which is used by Red Hat and Fedora, for example. These are some other Linux distributions. There are differences between the two formats, but both can be considered packages which hold installation instructions for programs, with how to set up, what dependencies are needed, and so on. So if you double click on this, it will open up in the default software manager for Ubuntu called Ubuntu Software. This is new, by the way, in Ubuntu 16.04. In previous editions, you had something else called the Ubuntu Software Center, which was removed. You will of course note the install button, but currently this is giving, at least in my system, errors. I think it's hung up on the password and it's not moving forward. I hope you get a better experience and it works for you, but I will exit. Let me minimize this and open a new terminal, and I will install sudo apt-get install 𝐏𝐫𝐨𝐥𝐿. Now remember, I said that deb files can be considered packages. Ubuntu Software can install these packages, and 𝐏𝐫𝐴 is just an alternative to Ubuntu Software. It can also install packages, and this is what I will use. So enter Y for yes and enter. I am not sure why, but the Ubuntu Software just opened up in the background. Let me close this, and the installation is done. Clear the screen and minimize. So I will right click and open with 𝐏𝐫𝐴 package installer. Note that it's reading the contents. It's telling us that all dependencies are satisfied, so I will just install the package. Enter the password, and the installation has begun and finished. So I will close this. If I try to search the dash, I am not getting anything. This usually fixes itself after a restart and the application will show up. But just to confirm, I will open the terminal and run SUBL, short for Sublime Text, of course. This is the link which we get by default. And yes, Sublime is available to us. Right click and select Log to Launcher so we get the shortcut. Notice the icon has turned into a question mark, and this will be fixed after I restart the system. I'm not sure why that happened. Anyway, given its popularity, I am certain you know how to use Sublime Text and have some preferences of your own, some packages which you always use, so I will just stop here for now. I will restart my system and we will continue in the next video. Let's install the Google Chrome browser next. You will notice the Sublime Text icon did refresh. Let me search for Google Chrome and open the web page. Download. And we need to select our package, so the deb file in our case, and accept and install. Save the file. Minimize this. Open our files. In the downloads directory, right click and open with 𝐏𝐫𝐸. Notice this is the exact same process we used with Sublime Text earlier. Note this time it's telling us that we need to install some dependencies, but 𝐏𝐫𝐸 will do this automatically for us. So let's install the package. Enter our password. And it's finished. Let me exit out of this. And if I search for it, I do have Google Chrome installed. Let me make a shortcut here. And sure, let's set this as the default browser. And yes, Chrome is working. Now, just to show you this, let me go to the dash and select default. I want to check that Google Chrome is actually our default browser. The only option I get is called details because of the context search capabilities. Let me open this. And we have the Ubuntu details screen where you can see the overview as the first item with the logo, the version of the distribution and some system settings. And the second item in the menu is for the default applications. And for web, Google Chrome is indeed the default. Okay. Close this, minimize this. Remember, we had a problem earlier with brackets and live previews, so let's see if this is still happening. Open brackets and live preview does work now, which is great. Now again, just to show you this, let me make a modification here. Try to save and error saving file because of the permissions required. Remember, this was installed outside of our home directory in our main system, where we do not have access by default. So in effect, the files we want to modify are off limits to us. You would need to try this out in a file inside your code folder, for example, but I will leave this up to you to experiment with. Let's continue in the next video. So we have our system set up. We have code editors and Chrome installed. In this section, I want to show you a few alternatives for your shell, for the terminal. And I will start with a disclaimer. This caused me the biggest problems when I first started using Linux. I would recommend caution as you follow along, and actually I would suggest you watch the videos in this section first before actually trying to modify anything. What I will show you next are some alternatives which you can use instead of the system defaults. And actually you don't need to use these. If you don't want, you can just keep the defaults and skip over this section entirely. But it's nice to know that they exist and they can be very helpful in your activity. With that being said, let's look at 𝐒𝐫𝐨𝐥𝐿 first, a community-driven framework for managing your 𝐒𝐨𝐥 configuration. Now, if you remember, we discussed very briefly about Bash, the default shell in Ubuntu. 𝐒𝐨𝐥 is another shell, an alternative to Bash, with some additional features like better completion for commands, spelling correction, better history for commands, and so on. And 𝐒𝐫𝐨𝐥 is a collection of plugins and themes for improving your workflow. Scroll down and we get the prerequisites. Unix-based system we already have. ZSH should be installed. Let's do that. In the terminal, let's run sudo apt-get install ZSH. Enter the password, type Y, enter. And done. Let me clear this. Curl we have installed, git as well. So let's copy the command for curl and paste this. If you've been following along, notice we are starting the basic shell with sh and using the lowercase c option to pass in a command. And with curl we are downloading the installation script from GitHub. Run this and note the last line, time to change your default shell to ZSH. So type the password to allow this, and it's finished. You will notice, of course, the prompt has changed with a green arrow and a blue tilde character. This is the default theme you get with 𝐒𝐫𝐶H, and remember the tilde signifies the home folder, so that's where we are currently. Now just to show you a bit, I can still use the basic commands, of course. ls lists the contents of the folder we are in. Let me go into the code folder where we have our free test folders. If I type cd and just write test and then press tab, notice the autocomplete feature has started and it's found 2 directories that have test in the name. So I can continue writing and press tab again, or let me delete this and clear. If I press tab to get the autocomplete suggestions, then press tab again, I am in the list of results and I can use the right or left keys to move between the results and select the one I want. If I initialize a Git repository here, notice the prompt has changed and it's showing that I am on the master branch. The yellow X after master is telling me that I have uncommitted changes, which is a nice touch. Now let me exit out of this and notice I am still in the terminal. The exit command in this case exited out of the ZSH session, not the terminal. We were returned to our bash session from earlier. Let me exit out of this as well to close the terminal, and if I open it again, bash is showing up. When installing the 𝐒𝐫𝐶H framework, the command to change shell was executed, but in order for this to take effect, we need to either restart or log out and log back in again. So I will do that and we will continue in the next video.